Welcome to the Thriving Artist Podcast, where we share strategies and support for artists to thrive.
We know that the art world can feel like a lonely place, and we want to provide a network of support, impactful strategies, and an abundance of encouragement to help you grow your authentic art career.
We're your hosts. I'm Jamie Smith.
And I'm Kaylin Butine, and we are also the co-founders of the Thrive Together Network, a community of female and non-binary identifying artists and artists who are caregivers.
We truly believe in community over competition, and we're so glad you're here. Enjoy this episode. Welcome to another episode of the Thriving Artist Podcast. I'm your host, Jamie Smith, and my favorite art newsletters to receive are ones where I get a little peek behind the scenes. I get a peek into the artist practice, not just the finished work. I love it.
Yes, and I'm Kaylin Butine, your other host, and I'm always impressed by artists who keep their clients and their audience updated on like everything that's going on in their newsletter. When they like pull all the details together and they're like, come to this thing, come to that thing. Like, I think I just feel very impressed by folks who do that in a timely fashion. So you can guess that today on the podcast, we are talking about newsletters, and we're going to offer some strategies and support to help you get a monthly art newsletter out into the world. There are just so many aspects of newsletters that we could talk about. We actually broke sort of this idea up into 2 episodes. So today we're talking about sort of getting your system built around your newsletter. And the next episode that we release will be all about what kind of content can go in your newsletter. And we're basically sharing like a big list of content ideas for you. So make sure you tune in next week. But yeah, we're really excited to share about this. This is something that Jamie and I both have a lot of experience with, but also, have like pros and cons about like we have a love-hate relationship with newsletters because it's one of those things that as artists, like you want to do it, you feel like you got to do it, and you see how great they are, but then it's another admin task that we all have to do. Yay.
Another thing on the to-do list.
Yep.
My newsletter has definitely been on a hiatus due to my maternity leave. But before my maternity leave, I sent out one saying the baby was coming soon, and I got such like wonderful replies, and I had art in there and actually sold a piece, and I just saw the power of newsletters, and I felt people just engaged in my practice. And so it is something that, to be honest, quite different than I feel about social media at the moment. It is something that I'm excited to dip back into because I feel like when someone is willing to hit reply back to what you've said on a newsletter, it just feels like a real connection point. Comments, I feel that way too on Instagram. It's not to say that, but there's some power in a newsletter is what I'm trying to say. And Kaylin and I both have written a lot of art newsletters in our time. We write one for Thrive Together Network. Kaylin has one for Artist Mother Community. Then we have our own newsletter lists. And then sometimes we overcomplicate things and we write like different ones for some people and for other people in our network. And we're in it.
We're newsletter queens. Just take our advice because, we've written a lot of them.
We have.
Yes. And we've really strategized newsletters together and like talked about them as a business strategy. So I do think, we have some things to say about this, but also, there's never like any one way to go about this. We're going to share some tips and strategies, but, you may have a different system, and that's great. So the first thing that we think is important for you to do when you're setting up your newsletter is to create a vision. Your vision can be many things. There's no one way to go about this, right? You could start with what you want your newsletter to look like. You could just think about the design, like maybe that is what's exciting to you and what's going to get you like invigorated around this. You could look at like, what's kind of my palette going to be? What's my like branding going to be with my newsletter? How do I want the content to like visually look and flow and present to the readers? That could be one way to go about creating your vision. But you also might think about like the vision in a more abstract way in terms of like how it's connecting to your goals. What is like your vision for your newsletter in terms of like what is it going to do for you? What do you want it to do in terms of how it's going to support your career? Like I think doing some writing, some sketching, some Pinteresting around like the visualization part of your newsletter is just a great place to start.
And it can be really helpful to start in this process, seeing the artists you follow in their newsletters. And again, very important that we're supporting other people. So always follow an artist newsletter if you can,
Mhm.
and to kind of see what are ones that you feel like you would hit the reply back and like
Mhm.
you would maybe buy a piece of work because you find it interesting what they have to say. Because there's a lot of ways to do it. So I have artists that I follow that is definitely more behind the scenes. I get to know their personality and kind of their life, almost like a blog kind of
Mhm.
idea. Then I have other newsletters that are much more professional. You can tell they're more towards like a curatorial lens. It's more important dates, exhibitions, or writing that have been written about them as artists. And, again, it's your personality and also your goals.
Mhm.
And then also there's ones that I have artists that really send a newsletter about a project or a body
Mhm.
of work. And that again is kind of to their like collector base. So I think it's really important that you kind of, again, with all this stuff, is knowing yourself and knowing your practice and what you want, to create that vision and get that clarity. And I love the behind the scenes look personally. I find those the ones that I do want to hit reply back. So it's definitely worth, starting to look at what you like, starting to make that kind of vision board around it, get some ideas, because that's going to help you buy in and consistently do it if you're excited about the style that you're doing it in and have that full vision.
Yes. So doing a little research, creating a vision for yourself is step one. I think step two, we're getting into the less sexy, fun, more admin related parts. And, after you create your vision, you really want to number two, pick your system. So by system, I mean, what outlet will you use to put your newsletter out in the world? Like what sort of platform are you going to use? I am most familiar with Squarespace email campaigns, MailChimp, and Substack because those are the systems that I have used before. We currently use Squarespace email campaigns for our Thrive Together network newsletter. I currently have a Substack that I recently set up at the start of this year. MailChimp is something I've used in the past for the Artist Mother newsletters. And so these are all systems that are relatively easy to set up. They have different features, they have different price points, and you can do different things. And of course, these are not the only options out there. There's Flowdesk, there's all sorts of other ways that you can get a newsletter out into the world. This is the part where you do kind of have to do some research and think about like how much money you want to spend, what is your budget, what do you think like your readership will be, because pricing often depends on how many emails you're going to collect on that newsletter. And we're not going to like go into details about each format and each system here, but just to say that like this is part of the process, is doing that work of figuring out what system are you going to use. I think even spending 30 minutes to an hour of just doing a little research, you'll probably be able to land at your answer.
Mhm.
Personally, I like Substack for my art newsletter right now, my personal art newsletter, because it's free. And I'm not making a lot of money off of my personal art, like selling my work or anything at this stage in my career. So I wanted a tool that, wasn't going to be like an added business expense for me. But for like Thrive Together Network, we already have a Squarespace website set up. It wasn't too much to add on the email campaign widget or whatever you call it. And so that felt like a good fit for us. So we didn't have to sort of come up with a new system.
Mhm.
So, again, there's pros and cons to the many different types of things. But I just think this is the not so fun part, but the essential part is like picking your system and figuring out how you're going to get your newsletter out in the world.
Yeah, and at some point you just have to pick something and try it. And especially if you're at the point where you have zero newsletter subscribers,
Mhm.
um, yeah, just pick one and get started. You can always change. You just export that list you've created and put it into another system if that's what you decide. So, it is pick a system, but it's not spend a lifetime worrying about it. All systems honestly are pretty much created equal. I use the Squarespace platform. The con is that it is not free, and so you
Mhm.
pay it along with your website. But the pro is you literally click a button and add in newsletters, and then when someone subscribes, it just goes right to the list. It's very, very easy. It's
Mhm.
also very much looks and feels exactly like my website.
Mhm.
So it's very seamless in that way, but you're going to pay for that. So it's just taking, 30 minutes tops, picking one, and then saying you have a newsletter.
Yes. Well, and that research, the questions are also something to ask artist friends, like
Mhm.
to say like, "Oh, I noticed that your newsletter is on Substack. Why did you choose Substack?" And that
Yeah.
that might help you make that decision. Okay, so the third thing to do when setting up your art newsletter is to capture and collect. So during the first steps of clarifying your vision and picking your system, hopefully you've worked out what your newsletter is going to be about, right? You have a clearer picture of like, I'm going to talk about these three things in my newsletter, or I'm going to like use my newsletter to support this part of my practice or these goals. So you've kind of like worked through some of like what the basics are going to be, and come to a better understanding of what you're going to be sharing. But now you have to think about how you're capturing the information and collecting it, and how you're like literally putting those things into your newsletter so that you can have sort of this seamless system, so that every time you create a newsletter, it doesn't feel like you're opening the junk drawer and like looking for, the random button from your sweater or whatever, right?
Mhm.
So, for example, maybe you want to share more about your studio life and your creative process in your newsletter. How are you going to capture that content that you want to share that will go in your newsletter? Will you use a studio journal? Maybe your Thriving Artist map, like we do a lot of writing in there, the studio workbook that we've created. You can jot down thoughts while you're in the studio. And then when it's time to sit down and write your monthly newsletter, you grab your map or you grab your studio journal and you flip through it and you start looking at what you were writing. And that can be like a way to collect that information about your practice, about what you're thinking about. Maybe this is something that I personally do is when I'm in the studio and I'm taking like shots of like work in progress and stuff, I try to remember to throw those images into a folder just, on the free like app on my phone, so that when I'm ready to sit down and write a newsletter, it's like my art 2024 folder is there and I can just pull a few photos instead of having to look through, like pictures of my kids and all the other things, right? I think like really thinking through how you're gonna capture and collect the information that is going to go in your newsletter will just make this it'll simplify the process for you so that you kind of have yourself set up for success, and it doesn't feel super clunky every single time you sit down to write a newsletter.
And this might be something you're already doing. It could be, how you're writing your artist statements. It could be, again, like in a journal or anything like that. But for some people, it might be easy. For some people, it might be something that you have to really like create a system for too. The worst thing is to, set yourself up basically for failure if you're just sitting on a blank page without photos to look at or ideas. We really want to just make it simple so that it's already an annoying task to have to like pull this all together. How do you make it easier for yourself?
Yeah, and just another thing as we're talking, if you are somebody who's planning to use your newsletter just to share kind of like basic information about when you're showing your work, right? Maybe you're an artist who has like a lot of exhibitions. Um, your tools for capturing and collecting your information will probably be your planner and your calendar, right? So even looking back through your calendar and saying, okay, I'm getting ready to send newsletter. I'm going to look at the month behind me and the one month ahead of me. And like, that's how I'm going to collect the information that's going to go in my newsletter. I have that show that just happened and this one that's coming up, and that's going to be where I pull that information. So and just like thinking about where the information is coming from and how you're going to access it each month can be helpful.
Yeah. And from capture and collect, that step really leads us to scheduling your time. So this is the thing, is that this isn't just going to happen. And when we add something to our plate, Kaylin has taught me, and we've talked a lot about, we're always taking something away. So we already typically all feel that we're at full capacity as go-getter artists. And so when we add something like, I'm going to start an artist newsletter, well, something else is going to have to go. And it could be something from your domestic life, it could be for something from your art life. But maybe you are going to be less on Instagram this month because you're going to get that newsletter done. So you want to make sure that you are thinking through, where is this going to go? And again, like always, we believe once it's marked in a calendar, there's a higher chance, or marked in your studio practice book, there's a higher chance that's going to get done. So the kind of step there is to, get that schedule lined up.
And we really don't, we're not putting this episode out into the world because we want you to feel the pressure of the newsletter being like another thing that you have to do that's getting added to your plate. But really, we want you to feel in control, and we want you to know that like you can use a newsletter to support your career. But just really thinking about how you're going to schedule your time, and how you're going to fit it into your life is an important part, because as Jamie said, like we're all busy, and time is your most valuable asset. So we're not encouraging you to do things that take away from your precious priorities and your precious time. We want you to be smart about it so that you can, do it in ways that feel sustainable. So our last step for how to write a monthly newsletter is to, of course, put it out there. You've created your vision, you've researched, and you've picked your system. You've thought about how you're going to capture and collect your content and maybe set up some systems with that. You've scheduled your time when you're going, when you're going to make this happen. Now we just want you to do it. Take that leap. It can be really scary to hit the publish button for the first time, but just know that we are cheering you on. We want to see your newsletter out in the world. We support you, and we just really believe that the work that you are doing matters and it deserves to be shared about.
And it doesn't have to be perfect. The great thing
No.
about starting new at something is that there's not that many people watching. So just start. And then as your confidence grows, your voice grows, then you're going to start growing that list. But it's really important that you start, because and it doesn't have to come off that you're perfect or professional. It can be very casual, but started. So we encourage you to do that. And remember that next week we have an episode coming out that's ideas of content. So if you're going to do this in a sequence, we say get going so that next week you're ready to kind of have some ideas and it won't be an overwhelm. So we'd love you again to join our newsletters. We have the Thrive Together Network newsletter, and that's at our website, thrivetogethernetwork.com. And I have an artist website at jamiesmithstudio.com. And Kaylin, you have one too. Where is that?
Yeah, my newsletter is on Substack, so you can actually go to kaylinbutine.substack.com. And of course, we have one on the Artist Mother website too, artistmotherpodcast.com. So as always, we are here for you, we are cheering you on, and we really believe in the work that you are doing as thriving artists. Thanks so much for listening.